Welcome back to another episode here on the Biblical Conservative channel. This conversation that we're going to have with Hal Shurtleff is going to be very, very important. We're going to talk about the racist roots of Planned Parenthood, how there were some co-conspirators, if you will, that worked with Margaret Sanger to push this agenda, especially when it comes to the Negro Project and some other things that were involved with it. So stay tuned. It's eye-opening. Trust me, you'll learn a lot of things that you did not know, and may confirm and reaffirm some things that you did know. But pay attention. Please be sure to like, share, subscribe if you haven't done so already. We need to get this message out to as many people as possible. We know that Planned Parenthood has been defunded in the big beautiful bill in some ways, but in other ways, abortions and those kinds of things are still increasing. And so this conversation we're going to have right now is very, very important. And be sure to please share this with your friends because we need to get this message out.
Well,
How
thanks
you
for having
doing?
me, Steve. I'm doing fine, thank you. Thanks for having me. And I want to give a shout out to the Mordecai mission because I've been involved with them since the early days. And I sent out an email blast with a link to the book and hoping that people would download it and make use of it. And thank you for reaching out to me and having me on the show.
No problem. Yeah, when I got that, I was like, oh, wow, this is something that I hadn't seen before. And so I opened it up and it was very intriguing. So definitely a shout out to the Mordecai Mission. Pastor Green will be sure to spread this message with them as well because this is part of the agenda of the Mordecai Mission is to equip believers to stand firm on the things that we believe in. And when it comes to the sanctity of life, that's very, very important to us at the Mordecai Mission and here as well. So before we dig into the book, how for our listeners, could you give us a background, some of the things that you do and how you made it up to this point?
Yes, well, I'm the full-time director for Camp Constitution, which is a New Hampshire-based charitable trust. We were founded in 2008. And initially, we just ran a week-long family camp. In fact, we just got through our 17th annual camp a few days ago. And as time went on, we had a publishing arm, a radio show, and a speakers bureau. And in 17, I became full-time with Camp Constitution, early 17. And we were the plaintiff in a decision called Shurtleff v. Boston, a 9-0 U.S. Supreme Court victory for free speech, religious liberty, concerning the Christian flag in the city of Boston. And it was in 17 when we wanted to fly the Christian flag to commemorate Constitution Day and Boston's rich Christian history. And they said no. Liberty Counsel took our case, and almost 5 years later, we won it, and we actually flew the flag. We had a prayer vigil in front of the Supreme Court and a rally, and Pastor Green and Barbara from Harlem and W.E.B were there, and a few others came as well from the Mordecai Mission. So I greatly appreciate that. And thanks to the case, a lot of towns and cities around the country have stopped flying all what we would call third-party flags. In other words, flags that aren't directly related to a U.S. flag or state flag or county flag, which means a lot of rainbow flags weren't flying in towns and cities around the country in June because of our case. But it goes beyond just flags. It goes beyond this. There was a decision made in the early 70s called Lemon v. Kurtzner, I think I'm pronouncing that. And Lemon was an atheist from Pennsylvania that took exception to some state money going to, I think, parochial schools for limited reasons. And same thing, Rhode Island also was on the case. And as a result of that case, they had something called the Lemon Test, not the Lemon Law, not to be confused when you buy a bad car. So it got to the point where if a child said, "God bless you" in a public school, that was proscribed because separation of church and state. Or if you wore a cross or a crucifix in a classroom or a public setting, you couldn't do that. Even a candy cane. A candy cane, of course, has a Christian allegory behind it, and it's shaped like a J if you turn it up the right side, and that stands for Jesus. And we can't have candy canes, and anybody who might think about Jesus in a public school, that's horrible. So our case and the Joe Kennedy case, you may have heard of that. Coach Kennedy
Mm-hmm.
was he was an assistant coach, and he was praying on the 50-yard line, I think it was in, and I got a chance to meet him, and they made a movie about him as well. So our case and his case, the two of them really put to rest the Lemon Test. And although a lot of people don't know about it, and a lot of people still think you can't pray in a public spot, you can't bring a Bible. So it just takes education and time. And and that's so we're very pleased that God chose us. And I tell
Right.
when I gave this talk at the rally, I said God chose what is foolish in the world to confound the wise, and I'm living an example of that, right?
Right, right, right. That's such. You know, I remember. I'm glad you brought that. I remember that. I remember that case from a few years back about that, about the flags and those kind of things. Wow, I didn't know you were involved with that case because it was one of
Oh
those
yeah,
things. Because even down here, down in North Carolina, you know, even though we're quote unquote considered like a purple state, I mean, we have a lot of people that are biblically based, have a biblical mindset, and they don't know. They don't know about the fact that
you
you know
don't
you
know.
can. Yeah, they don't know about that, and so a lot of people just assume. I mean, even going back, kind of dovetails to the recent IRS notice that came out. They're saying preachers can, you know, endorse a candidate from the pulpit. I mean, a lot of preachers just don't want to take it upon themselves to stand firm. Nobody's saying you have to advocate or, you know, stump for a
Right,
particular
exactly.
candidate, but just stand for biblical values nowadays. It's hard to find people who are willing to do that nowadays.
I think a lot of pastors like to use that as an excuse not to discuss things because they fear that members of the church will leave, and the idea of just getting a bunch of people in the pews. It's not about that. It's about proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ, and you're going to offend people, and if you offend them, as Reverend Stevie Kraft, our camp chaplain, was up in Maine a few years ago defending Governor LePage, and we had a bunch of media people at the press conference, and Reverend Kraft said, "If you don't like that to say, there's the door. You can leave anytime you want." A great invention.
Right, right, right. That's true. That's true. My late pastor would say the same thing. You got plenty of doors. If you don't like what I'm
That's
saying,
right.
feel free to get up and walk out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that brings me to what we're talking about today. So the book that you prepared, "The Racist Roots of Planned Parenthood,"
Yeah.
and
Here's a hard copy. What it looks like, and it's available as a free. It's hard to send it
yeah,
as a
that's it.
free download on our website, campconstitution.net, and just you'll see the downloads, and scroll down and you'll see it, and you can download it.
Yeah.
We do sell it
So
on our camp online bookstore, but the PDF version is available free of charge.
great, great. So what prompted you to write this book? What were some of the things that you were sensing, or some of the things you had seen that prompted you to actually go through the process? Because I want to dig into some of the contents, but
Yeah,
what led you
exactly.
to
Yeah.
write it?
Well, I've been a pro-life activist for many, many years, and I was very well aware of the evils of Planned Parenthood and how many. I think every single Democrat member of Congress, with one exception, so either supports it or belongs to it in some category. But back in that late '80s, I read this book called Grand Illusions by George Grant, the legacy of Planned Parenthood, and George did an incredible job going into the writings of Margaret Sanger, pointing out her pro-Nazi, pro-racist roots, and some really horrible, disgusting things she said. She called people defective weeds, called for exterminating people, and so forth. So she didn't pull her punches, and how this organization became so widely accepted. I was also a very good friend of the late Dr. Mildred Jefferson, and I dedicated the book to her. She was the first black, and she didn't like the word black, by the way. She was the first black woman to graduate from Harvard Medical School, and she was a pioneer in the Right to Life movement. She was the founder of National Right to Life, and she died in 2010. And I know that she didn't live to see Roe v. Wade being repealed, but I know that her efforts, she and Phyllis Schlafly helped convince Ronald Reagan to take a pro-life stand, which may have got him elected. You can't prove that, but it's a good chance they did.
Right.
So I was always well aware of that. And it was interesting. Back in the late '80s, also, I got a letter. It was a fundraising letter from Planned Parenthood. And the reason why I got the mailing is because the address, I used to live at 199 Fairmount Avenue, which is a neighborhood of Boston, Hyde Park, 02136. This left-wing woman lived in 199 Fairmount Avenue, Newton, Massachusetts, 02163. They just reversed the two letters. I was getting her mailings, and it contained an acceptance speech that Martin Luther King gave at the first annual Margaret Sanger Award.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he himself never gave the speech. It was his wife that gave the speech. But he affirmed it like a week or two later. He reached out to the head of Planned Parenthood and thanked him for the opportunity to do that. And the letter is or the speech is published in my book. And that's sort of a sore topic because a lot of people, especially Christian conservatives, it's almost like there's 4 or 5 different Martin Luther Kings. Well, the real one, please
Mm-hmm.
stand up.
Right.
The godly man, the man of peace, the radical, the pro-abortion, the pro-life. Which one is which? You can't
Yeah. The
all be
communist.
all.
Yeah. Which one? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
It was interesting. You know who Vince Ellison? Vince
Mm-hmm.
Ellison, black, and we became friends, and he is one of the harshest critics of Martin Luther King. But when I first met him, he was not aware that King was the first recipient of the Margaret Sanger Award. And you can go online. You don't have to believe me. You can find that speech. Just
Oh
go
yeah.
online and it pops up.
Yeah.
Planned Parenthood is very proud of it. By the way, Lyndon Johnson was the other recipient, President
Oh, I
Lyndon
didn't know that.
Johnson. Oh,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. So, but what he told me, what I learned from Vince, is that his famous "I Have a Dream" speech was written by Stanley Levinson, a
Mm-hmm.
communist.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought about it. I says, the devil knows the Bible better than we do, right?
He does.
And the
Yep.
enemy will always twist and turn the Bible, to make their, they'll use scripture improperly, to try to accuse us of things, and they
Mm-hmm.
they do it all the time. So I'm sure they're going to say that. But Vince listened to it. He said he was at the hotel or the motel, which is now a
The
museum in
Lorraine. Yeah.
Tennessee,
Uh-huh.
where he was and he's listening to it, and then something caught him. Something he said, I listened to the speech a million times. He said that 1,000,001 time there's something that was not right because a lot of it sounds very good. Listen
Yeah.
to it, let little black and white children play in the streets of Selma, Alabama. I have a dream. That sounds good. Well, that's nothing wrong with that. Should happen. And I think in some cases it was, even back then it was happening. But it was something he said about not being free. He said, wait a minute, no, God gave us our freedom.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to go to the white man to get my freedom, you know.
True.
And then when King was arrested because there was a motel in in Florida, in Tallahassee, and the clerk, the motel clerk, called up the cops, and King, I think, I don't know if he was arrested at the place, but King said that this man took his dignity from him, and he said, "How does white man making $2 an hour take my dignity away? You can't take my dignity. Only God gave him my dignity, and only He can take it away. So not some guy making $1.50 an hour in a cheap motel." So that's when he said, really started looking into it, and when it comes to uh, at some point, I got a copy of the infamous Negro Project letter that Margaret Sanger sent to Dr. Clarence Gamble. And by the way, I just looked at the table of contents. There's no reference to Gamble in this book or the Negro Project because he probably didn't know about it at the time, or any reference to Martin Luther King's letter. So I think this why our little book was kind of needed as a supplement to all the good stuff that's been published exposing Planned Parenthood. So I read the letter, and many years ago, and I would repost it and let people know about it. And the letter was dated, I think, December 10th, 1939, and she was living in Arizona, and Gamble lived in the town of Milton, Massachusetts. And I didn't pay much attention to that, but the letter itself, and the letter's published. In fact, I published most of the correspondence that I found at the library. And she said that she was advocating that black clergy and black doctors are hired to work in these clinics to promote, at that point, it was birth control in black neighborhoods. She used the word colored Negro, was kind of funny because, and so anyway, I noticed the address was Adams Street, Milton. And I said, I used to live within a few miles of that. Now, Milton is a very exclusive neighborhood. I lived in the Hyde Park section. I used to drive near it every day. And there's a museum, the Forbes Museum, near a few doors down from the Gamble house. Now, Gamble died in '65. I don't know who lives in the house now, so don't go to that address and protest. So back in let's see, it was in 18. It was November of November 19. I invited Reverend Kraft to come up to do some speaking engagements, and I said, Rev, let's do a video across the street from the Gamble house and read the letter, that letter that Sanger sent to Gamble on that date. And so he read it, and we made the video commenting on it. But as I was videotaping, I said, it dawned on me, just about maybe 7 or 8, and these are beautiful homes. They're all probably worth 5 or 6 million apiece. Just about 4 or 5, less than an eighth of a mile away, was the birthplace of George Herbert Walker Bush, Prescott Bush, the father. Now Herbert Walker would be the one that the president in the '90s. He's the father of George W. Bush. Prescott Bush was Planned Parenthood's first treasurer,
Wow.
which comes to, yeah, he was the first, and I knew that. So I thought, gee, I wonder if there's correspondence between Prescott, Bush, and Gamble. They were neighbors, and although eventually the Bushes moved to Connecticut, and Prescott ran for the U.S. Senate and won his election, and the son was actually born, George W. was born in a hospital in Connecticut. So they stayed, and of course they made their money in the oil business in Texas. So, and I didn't go right away. It was interesting too. That's that same day George Herbert Walker died. It was very uncanny. He died the same day we made that video. Later on that evening, when the news says, "Oh my goodness!" And now that house is also a private residence, and there's a little historical marker there, but it's not. So don't protest the Herbert Walker birthplace because the people there have nothing to do with Herbert Walker Bush. But a lot of the early Republicans were leftists. They were elitist establishment people, and they were big supporters. And some of them still are at Planned Parenthood. So I did. It wasn't until January of 2020, right before the lockdown, that I visited the Harvard Medical School Library, which houses the papers of Dr. Clarence Gamble. And I didn't find any correspondence between Prescott Bush, and Clarence Gamble. By the way, Clarence Gamble was the grandson of one of the founders of Procter and Gamble. He was an heir to their fortune. And although I can't say that Procter and Gamble had anything to do with he did stuff independently of Procter and Gamble. I just want to qualify that. I don't want, and I don't know what Procter and Gamble, what they are involved in today, but they had nothing to do directly, as far as I know, with Gamble's work, his evil work. I must use that adjective to describe. But what I did find. And the thought was, there's an old saying, why write when you can speak? Why speak when you can nod? Why nod when you could wink, right? So the less correspondence, the less evidence there is of, it's just like when you do an email, it's stuff or you post something on internet, it's there forever, So if you don't want everyone in the world to see what you're saying, don't put it on there,
Right.
Say it privately, say it without it being recorded. And when evil people get together, they mostly don't want, and some of them are quite proud of their work, but a lot of people didn't like what they were doing. So I was shocked at the stuff I found, and I published, and I shouldn't have been, but the stuff that the way they discussed stuff so cavalier, just off the cuff, and the folks that she was affiliated with too. Now here's Sanger working with Nazis and communists. I was thinking, what if she did stuff for good? The organizational skills that this woman had, my goodness, the things that she could have done if she was a righteous woman instead of an evil atheist that hated mankind and wanted to see it exterminated. So I also had some other correspondence that Gamble made and a few other people. One of the persons that Sanger had working with her was a man named Lillian de Filbus, I think, and she did operations. Lydia Allen de Filbus. She did sterilized. She did a lot of sterilization, and a lot of this was probably without their consent. Now we have a very sordid history going back to the early part of the last century, up until the 1950s, even beyond, where people were forcibly sterilized, and it wasn't just blacks. I want to qualify that. And more whites that were sterilized, but if you look at the population per capita, there were more blacks. But the notion of the eugenics movement was basically there was inferior people with birth defects, people with what they consider low IQs.
Right.
You think about intelligence quotient. It was a racist back in England, whose name will come to me, that tried to make his case for racism by saying that blacks are inferior. It was Tom Galton. So they had this test, a reaction test. They got blacks, whites, and American Indians, and some kind of stimulus. Indians did better overall, blacks second, whites third. So they say, well, you see, that proves that you're inferior intellectually if you respond to some stimulus quicker. What's that got to do with intelligence?
I know.
Put my right to block it. Does that mean I'm stupid? No, it means I want to preserve myself, defend myself. I don't know what's anything to do with intelligence, but that's the depravity of these people. So there was so many of these states passed sterilization laws, not all in the South too. Midwest, um, Massachusetts did, New Hampshire, Maine, I think Vermont, and this was the wave. And these eugenicists were really, and they had Nazis. And Sanger had a Nazi doctor, Ernst Rudin. Ernst Rudin wasn't just a low level Nazi official. He was in charge of the sterilization project. And we say we, Planned Parenthood of the United States taught the Nazis how to do it. In fact, Rudin would come to conferences in England and the United States. He was associated, he actually was awarded a medal by Hitler. And after the war, they had the Nazi war crimes. They decided not to even mention Rudin because it would have implicated a lot of Americans at high level. And they said, nah, any Englishman, that would be kind of embarrassment. So the eugenics movement became sort of unpopular. It isn't these people didn't apologize for their work. They just said, well, the Nazis gave us a bad name, even though we worked with them and we liked what they did, the public opinion. So we got to kind of keep a low profile.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually changed the name of these organizations. One of the things about it is when you get a lot of bad publicity, you change the name. For example, the CIA was known as the OSS, and the OSS was full of communists and globalists, so they changed it to the Central Intelligence Association. The National Council of Churches had a federation, the Federal Council of Churches, but it was known to be so pro-communist and socialist and not really biblical that they changed it to something else. So sometimes an organization changes its name to cover up its past crimes or past. Planned Parenthood did change that. I guess they were called what was it called? The Human. It was called something else prior to the early
Yeah.
40s.
Yeah.
But actually, in one of the letters from the Arkansas Eugenics Association, they changed their name to Planned Parenthood. They didn't have the issue, from one to the next. And what they did have success. In fact, they had a lot of success, and it's important. Who benefits and who pays. Who's the money
Mm-hmm.
trail? And it's fascinating. A guy by the name of Albert Lasker was the big funder of the Negro Project. If there was a Hall of Fame for advertisement executives, he'd be in the Hall of Fame. He was one of the men that promoted smoking amongst women. And
Yep.
I remember the old Virginia Slims commercials. You've got your own cigarette now, baby. You've come along. Yeah, you can get lung cancer and die just like your husband and your dad, right?
Yeah.
But and he married a woman, Mary, his wife, his second wife. She ran a birth control so-called clinic in New York City, and she divorced her husband, who was an art critic, art dealer, and married Lasker, who had a lot more money and was 20 years older. Now, they together, after World War II, they formed the Lasker Foundation, and one of the things they're advocating is federal money going into research. And he died, I think, in the early 50s. She became a really good friend of Lyndon Johnson. They put her picture on a stamp, and the Lasker Foundation still exists to this day. In fact, one of our instructors, Professor Willie Soon, who was an atmospheric scientist, he said to me, Hal, he said, the Lasker Foundation is like the minor leagues to the Nobel Peace Prize. If you get an award through them, it kind of gives you prominence. Like if you hit 350 in the AAA, they're going to call you up to
Mm-hmm.
the show. So this is like the minor leagues, the Lasker Foundation, and they do millions of dollars in research. So I found nothing on their website about the history. They're very proud of the history of Mary and Albert. Now, Clarence Gamble, went on to found an organization that promoted eugenics, similar to Planned Parenthood. And that organization still exists. I'm going to think of the name of it. And I went to their website, and they do have a disclaimer that their founder was a racist and eugenist, and they're apologizing for it. However, the mission hasn't changed any.
Right.
And the
Right.
mission is the same. They're still killing people in around the world, forced abortions or what have you. Just let me see if I can find the name of it. I want to make sure you get it because the organization still looks. You talk about The left talks about systemic racism, right?
Right.
And by the way, the National Institute for Health (NIH) has a Lasker Foundation grant. They have a Lasker found a grant. So they have a
Really?
grant they give to medical, yeah, named after the Laskers. I reached out to them, and I actually wrote to Robert Kennedy. Now I know, he gets 1,000 letters or so. I said, you need to change this. You need to say, because this most people don't know who the Laskers are. If they go to Wikipedia, you're not going to find anything about Albert Lasker being the big funder of the Negro Project. And Margaret Sanger would report back to him quite a bit. We talked to him about this and about that. And we're not sure how much he gave. He might have given $220,000 in 1930s was comparable to a million or quite a lot of
Hmm.
money. This was a test project. This wasn't to open them up all over the country. This is just to see the results, and they were very happy about the results. And they opened them up in there was one in Tennessee, and these were counties that were predominantly black. So they wanted, and in the letter, that first letter, she said that that blacks or Negro. I think the word Negro was a generic term. It wasn't meant
Yeah,
to be
Negroes at
insulting.
that time. Negroes. Yeah, it wasn't insulting to call it Negro. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. If you use it today, it's considered insulting. But she said that they respect the white doctors, but they let their hair down with the black doctors, so they're more comfortable among the black doctors, and it'd have more impact. By the way, Gamble didn't want to hire any blacks, but they also wanted to get clergy, and that's really. She actually had an advisory board, the Negro Advisory Board,
Hmm.
and W.E.B. Dubois was one of the top members of the advisory board working with Sanger. He had this concept called the talented tenth,
Yep.
and he wrote an article, and I have excerpts of it in the book. If I wrote this, I would have been labeled, rightfully so, a nasty racist. But he said that basically blacks, the vast majority, and I'm paraphrasing, the content is in the book, but he said the vast majority of basically poor Negroes
Hmm.
breed at a larger rate than poor whites. And I mean, breed? What do you mean? These are human beings made in the image of God. Uh, so, uh, so that's why he was
Yeah.
so loved by the eugenics, because he was on board.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
then you look at today, the black population of the United States, and that includes immigration from third world countries or countries of large black populations. It's at about 13%. It's leveled off. And I understand that half of the abortion pregnancies in many black communities, 50% or more, end in abortion, and that's all attributed to the work of the Negro Project. So
Hmm.
they got their money's worth if the goal was to keep people from being born,
Right.
and, or
Right.
and Sanger initially was not a big supporter of abortion. She even spoke out against it. But as time goes on, what was totally unacceptable 10 years ago, today people say, what's wrong with it?
Yep.
Men marrying men, people
Right,
would laugh
exactly.
at that. And today, what? You don't support that? You're evil. You're a phobe of some sort.
Yeah.
So it's so
Yeah.
quick. Obama spoke out. He said, "I don't believe in same-sex marriage." Hillary Clinton said the same thing. Joe Biden said the same thing. They also all spoke out against illegal immigration, and they turn on a dime. They don't even give it a second thought. Why did you change your position? They don't have to explain. They just change their position
Right.
because it's now the trend.
It's the
Oh, that's
trend. It's the
what they
cultural
want.
trend. Yeah.
That's what
That's
they
the
want
thing.
to do. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's
they
the
want
thing.
to be.
Yeah, and it's so important. I'll let you speak on those things because those things are factual. And the part you mentioned about the clergy, the black clergy, she also worked with um, the pastor at the time of Abyssinian Baptist Church in New
in,
York as
in
well.
New York City, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. He was also on that, and that's the thing that a lot of people don't know is that a lot of the prominent black leaders were actually working with Margaret Sanger on this Negro Project. Were working with her on birth control because, like W.E.B. Du Bois wanted to do another elites. They wanted that talented tenth. They wanted to separate themselves from the rest of the masses, as they called them. And so they believed in culling the herd, essentially, especially the ones that weren't breeding according to their terminology correctly. So we need to call them out because they've always wanted to have that position of prominence and to be utilized by the Marxists and the communists and the liberals like Sanger. And so these things that you're pointing out, I mean, they're not necessarily earth shattering to us because we know about the agenda, but to a lot of people, they don't know and they're kept in the dark deliberately. I mean, I know Planned Parenthood is trying to wash itself from the history of Margaret Sanger, and people don't even talk about that history. And so
Well,
it's
you know
glad that you wrote this
what's
book. Yeah.
what's fascinating is that Hillary Clinton was a recipient of the Margaret Sanger Award,
Yeah.
and they stopped giving them out in 2015 thanks to the work of many pro-life activists. They even changed it during the in the height of the George Floyd riots. You know, the left was tearing down statues of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, and they
Mm-hmm.
said, "Well, you know, we can play." No, we didn't tear them down physically, but we said, "Hey, you got a so-called clinic named after Sanger, who was an avowed racist." So they changed the name. They're
Yeah.
still killing black babies, but they
Right.
changed the name. There
Right.
was a statue of Sanger at the Old South Meeting House in Boston, where I'm from originally.
Hmm.
And because she gave a speech there, and I guess they banned her, and the statue has her with something over like a tape over her mouth. And there was a pro-life activist that was touring the place, and she said, "Hey, we can play this game too." So they had a bunch of people reach out to the organizers or the people that worked there, and they took the statue down and put it in storage. So, but you can still do that, but the evil work goes on, and that's the problem.
Yeah, that's the problem, right? It's so deceptive because, to your point, the majority of these Planned Parenthood facilities and these centers of exterminating life are located in minority, primarily black areas. And
That's
it's
right.
intentional.
That's
Going back to the Negro Project and going back to the birth control, I mean, it's intentional. The whole eugenics movement, and you're right, it wasn't just about necessarily blacks, but it's about the people that they considered the undesirables, those folks that had deformities and people with Down syndrome. And the thing about it, how this stuff is still going on in policy. I mean, when people talk about abortion, how you should abort a child based upon birth defects and those kind of things, that mentality of eugenics is still being pushed.
Oh,
And the
it
sad
really
part about
is.
it, yeah,
Well, I'm the father of 5 children. The youngest is now 20, and she's doing great. She's going to be a nurse next year, and she just came back from a missionary from Zambia, medical missionary, and she just loved it over there. Um, but they told us that when my wife was pregnant with my son Nathaniel, that he may have Down syndrome, and this he was born in '97, and they said that you should do an amnio. Now, because I didn't know what an amnio, but it's a test determining whether or not that he would be Downs. And I said, well, why would we do that? And she was a little hesitant. Well, you do that, then you make a decision. Make a decision for what? To abort the baby. I know in most Western European nations have little to no Down syndrome people because they abort them in advance. And I did say that we'll love that whatever God gives us, we're going to love and cherish, And he came up
yeah,
perfectly normal. But
yeah,
that's what they do now. They give the
yeah,
parents out abort because, I mean, some of these Down syndrome children are some of the sweetest, and they are just lovely, blessed. I had a dear friend that had Down syndrome, and she died. She was about 30. They tend to die at a young age.
hmm,
And she sent me the little card. They had a service for her. And he just loved her and adored her. And I have a few friends that have Down syndrome, and they're Down syndrome. And what a blessing they are to them. It's you want to exterminate this group of people because of a birth defect,
yeah,
because I look at you can't measure the intelligence of God. It's off the chart. It's just impossible.
all right,
So the average, and I don't like the IQ test, but let's say intelligence quotient. Let's say that the average IQ is 100. I think that's the basis. So for the sake of 50 IQ points or 40 IQ points, we're willing to commit murder, right?
hmm,
Murder unborn. Well, if God had that standard, He would have never created
yeah,
us.
exactly. Everybody be wiped out, right? There'd be nobody
Dumb.
here.
Because He's God. I mean, He
So
created the universe. He spoke the universe into
yeah,
existence.
yeah,
Some people have trouble finding the dipstick on their
I
car,
know
or doing
they do.
certain things. If
Oh,
you
yeah.
can't find the dipstick, we're going to exterminate you. We're going to
I
kill you.
know. We're gonna take you out. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for real. So let me ask you. So I know we covered a lot, and it's a lot in the book. What was probably the most surprising thing that you found that you didn't know before? What was the most surprising?
So I'm glad you asked that because, but the Puerto Rican Project, I'd never heard of it. I was a pro-life activist most of my life, never heard of Puerto Rican Project. I asked a lot of my pro-life friends who are more active than I have been, and they never heard of it. So that was mentioned in these letters. So I did a little. There's research. You could find research if you know it exists. But Dr. Gamble, that was his baby. He was experimenting with spermicides, and they found that Puerto Rico they didn't have any restrictions against it. So they had several hundred, I think maybe 1,000 poor Puerto Rican women that were used as guinea pigs for the birth control pill, and they had some deaths. They had blood clots, and after by the late 50s, they were able to market the product. It was approved by the FDA. These poor women were never compensated; their families never compensated, and you could look at some leftists say, yeah, they were used as guinea pigs. It's like a dirty little secret they don't want you to know about.
Mm-hmm.
And in one of the last letters that Gamble, that I think it was dated 1959, he's writing to three of the ladies that were in this section of this place of Puerto Rico. I can't remember the name of the city. Basically giddy over it. He called them dear collaborators. Well, when you collaborate, it's usually you're doing something wrong, not
Right.
doing something above board. So that's was the biggest surprise there.
So I guess my it leads me to another question. So the Negro Project, based upon what you were reading, I know we touched on it. What do you think was the aim of the Negro Project? Was it to sterilize the undesirables? Was it to test out abortion or birth control? What do you think was the primary aim of the Negro Project? What was their agenda?
Sanger's supporters will say that when she used the word, we don't want word to get out that we wish to exterminate the Negro. Some people say, oh, no, she was worried that people would misinterpret her intentions, that she really didn't want to exterminate them, but she was doing them a favor because there were too many of them and there were too many of them in poverty. So having smaller families would be a good thing, not a negative thing. But if you read her writings, uh, you would draw the different conclusion that yes, she did wish to exterminate them. And one of the more interesting letters, I should say, shocking letters, it was in the mid 50s. It was one of the last letters between she and Gamble. She said that she's lamenting that they're not making much progress because I can hear still, and I get out on the cover of the book here. It said, when I see the schoolyards all over the country filled with roaring, shrieking children, I'm not sure I have accomplished a thing.
Right.
That's diabolical. Don't you want to kill all children?
Yeah.
Every one of them?
Yeah.
And Gamble said, "Oh yeah, we've done a lot." And they really, they look at this as one of the biggest things that ever happened: the acceptance of birth control and eventually abortion.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I just showed the movie Roe v. Wade to a couple of young ladies that came to our camp, and Larry Later was one of he was a close associate of Sanger. And later was the one that got he and Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who later repented and exposed it. But he said, yeah, Margaret Sanger, well, she did speak out against abortion back in the 20s and earlier, that she would be okay with it today, So, and she said that back in 69 and 70. And later was they called for abortion on demand. And some of the people said, no, that's too much. No, we have to. It's just a dialectic movement, the dialect or Hegelian dialect. We want this, but we'll accept that. We'll go this far. It's
Right.
like when a labor union we want to have $100 an hour. We're not going to get it, but that's what we're calling for. We'll
Mm-hmm.
accept 50, but then when we get to 50, we'll go for 150. So
Right.
there was a gradual approach, and they understood that. So, and it was also in the movie how Planned Parenthood, hey, they made up out and out lies. Oh, back alley abortions, and they
Mm-hmm.
just lied, and they had no trouble lying about it. So I do recommend to the viewers that they do get a copy. You can see it live streamed. Roe v. Wade. It was made, and it was fascinating because my dear friend, the late Dr. Mildred Jefferson, whom I dedicated the book to, she's depicted by Stacey Dash, and you just heard Stacey Dash's her dog, the father, one of the puppies. Our two dogs got together and had 9 puppies, and the one that was barking was one of the puppies that we kept. So blame it on
Okay.
Stacy if you're complaining about the dog barking. So she plays Dr. Mildred Jefferson in the movie, so I do
Okay.
recommend it. but it shows that two members of the Supreme Court had family members that worked for Planned Parenthood. They should have recused themselves. They never did.
Mm-hmm.
And the case had nothing to do with law. It was all political pressure. They
Yeah.
made a decision based on political pressure, and it's something that needs to be done. But thankfully, Roe v. Wade was repealed. It doesn't mean that abortion is still in most states a law of the land, but to
Mm-hmm.
make it a little more difficult. And again, I never thought I'd live to see Roe v. Wade repealed, so I was
Yeah.
very happy about that.
Yeah.
But I think it's important. This little book, again, you can download it. It's important to have the facts because you could discuss things. Well, that's your opinion. No, here's the letter. Here's the correspondence. This shows how evil these people were and how
Right.
diabolical. And Sanger was very much anti-Christian. She hated Catholics more than anyone else, but she didn't have any use for anybody who believed in God. It was interesting. Her mom would bring her to church, but the father was a socialist and an atheist, and his influence. And usually, the father's influence wins over. Just like if if a child is brought to church by the mom and the dad isn't either not in the picture or doesn't go to church, usually the dad's view wins out. When they
Right.
come of age, they don't have a church life. So that's how important the family is. But these folks said the state's the family. When Hillary Clinton said it takes a village to raise a child,
Mm-hmm.
well, it takes the government to raise a child. That's what she was
Right.
advocating. And no, and the government is the last thing. The government. Now there are some good things the governments do over the year, but it's a lot of bad things they do, and promoting birth control and abortion. And
Yeah.
there's a movie that I recommend. It's called. I think I made a reference to it in this book. It was made in the 30s, and it was criticizing eugenics movement. It was called
Hmm.
Children of the Future. Oh, is it Children of the Future? Um, and you watch it on YouTube free of charge. And
Hmm.
it was how the eugenics movement worked. How they would come in, the county doctors would come in and see this family living in poverty, maybe have a child that is retarded or another one that's a criminal. And the movie's a little hokey. They come into this house and the father's a hopeless drunk and he's fathering every 9 months he get another child and one of them is in jail. He's got one that's handicapped, and only one normal one, so-called normal, was one that she wasn't a member of their family, but she was the one that kept it together. And they had to sterilize her, but thankfully she wasn't sterilized. The hero comes to save the day, and but it's a true story. And there were thousands of people who were sterilized that should never have been sterilized because of
Right.
so-called IQ. Yeah, there was that infamous Supreme Court case. It concerned. It was a woman in Virginia, and Olive Wendell Holmes Jr. said something like that: 3 generations of morons is enough. And
Yeah.
this was Casey, but she had a normal IQ. Again, IQ is a man-made construct anyway,
Mm-hmm.
and I think pro-lifers need to be able to articulate the message, and the best way to do it is with facts.
Yeah.
Now, evil people, the Bible talks about reprobate minds.
Mm-hmm.
All the facts in the world won't change that because
No.
they have minds that don't function properly. They could look at a baby that's been aborted, late term, even after the baby's born, and they think it's okay because they don't have the same value of life. But there's a lot of people that will be influenced by our work. And like there were these 3 great movies that came out in the last 5 years, pro-life movies, including Roe v. Wade, Gosnell, the biggest serial killer in American history, and Unplanned, the Abby Johnson story. And
Yep.
just telling these stories, people don't know these things. So, and a lot of people are they shrug their shoulders. They don't. That's what happened with the homosexual movement. They said
Mm-hmm.
all we have to do is get people to accept it, and the rest it's just a matter of time.
Yep.
And from I remember back in the early 70s, I was 12, 13 years old, and the argument was what 2 consenting adults do in the privacy of their own bedroom is nobody's business.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to argue that point. But if I have to pay for the externalities or the outcomes of that behavior, then I have a say, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we had the AIDS, of course, the AIDS epidemic, and then from that was, well, we should be able to marry. Civil unions. We don't want to marry. We just want to be,
Civil
if we
union.
have to visit one, we want to be able to go to the hospital if our partner is sick.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was marriage. And now the state has a compelling interest. So state governments, local governments spend millions of dollars promoting the lifestyle, and they're doing it to
Exactly.
children.
Exactly.
And
Yep.
I thank God they're overplaying their hand, and
Yes.
there's been some
Yes.
pushback, and it's good to
Yes.
see that. But what took so long?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
And I think the part of it is that goes back to what we talked about at the beginning. Too many Christians, and one thing I always say is that when it comes to the LGBTQ and how much of a foothold they've gained is because, it started with tolerance, like you said, it started with tolerance to consenting adults in their own bedroom. Then it moved to acceptance, then it moved to affirmation, and now it's normalization. I mean, you can't watch a TV show without seeing a member of the LGBTQ in it, and they're doing it intentionally to get the young people to see it as normal.
that's right.
Because whenever you normalize something, then it makes it more readily acceptable and readily a part of the culture. It's part of the zeitgeist now. So when you see somebody walk around, two guys walking around holding hands, and when you see a boy or a man who wants to calls himself a woman, go into the women's restroom, I mean, that's the next thing they're pushing. Ultimately, the ultimate thing they're trying to get to is that MAPS, that minor attracted persons. I mean, that's the thing they're trying to get to, and they're slowly introducing this more and more.
Pedophilia.
Yeah, pedophilia. Yeah,
Yeah,
pedophilia.
there was. It's good to have historical background on this too. And there was John Maynard Keynes, Keynes. He
Mm-hmm.
was a British socialist. He was an advisor to many people. He was advisor to Roosevelt. He went to the Soviet Union during the height of the Russian Revolution, and he actually designed the Soviet currency. He was also a child molesting homosexual, and a lot of people don't know that about him. A real degenerate and pervert. And he had a partner by the name of Leighton Strachey, I'm probably pronouncing the name, Loitton Strachey. And their correspondence has been somewhat revealed. And they used to go to North Africa, where he said bed and boy can be had cheaply had. And Strachey said, in 100 years we will live in a homosexual world. He said this probably in 1920.
Mm.
What did he know back then that people today are still denying? He said we will have a homosexual world by in 100 years. And of course, it's all God's on the throne.
Yeah.
God's going to determine what. It's not this degenerate pervert, but they were exploiting Muslim children that were sold into sexual slavery
Mm-hmm.
in North Africa. Child
Mm.
trafficking. It's been around a long time, not just the last few
Right.
years. And why isn't he widely condemned for that?
Mm-hmm.
So and
Interesting.
also I pointed out there's only one Democrat in the U.S. House. He's from Texas. That's pro-life, and his
Yeah.
name is I can't remember his last name, but the Democrat Party primaried. He spent a lot of money trying to primary him. He still won. But the Democrats were the early founders,
Mm-hmm.
mostly Democrat Catholics, were the founders of the pro-life movement.
Right. Right. I know.
And that's within a generation. And every single black Democrat in the House and Senate are strong supporters of Planned Parenthood. You asked Jasmine
Mm-hmm.
Crockett about it, right?
Yep.
Uh, and they used to have Faye Waddleton was a black woman that was head of Planned Parenthood. You
Mm-hmm.
talk about a Judas goat. You know what Judas goat is, the ones that goat that leads the others to the slaughter, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
in Germany, in Nazi Germany, they had Jews that were trustees of these camps. They were called
Really.
kappas, Kappa,
Huh.
and they were given better treatment. They had more food. They're the ones that did all the dirty work, for the Nazis. And the reward was to, and some of them were eventually killed. Some of them survived, but they were more than willing to sell out and betray their people for favor, and that's what these folks are doing. They should they talk about racism and systemic racism. This organization, Planned Parenthood, is systemically
Right,
racist.
right.
The
They are
state.
systemic. That's the systemic racism that's been going on for a century. But obviously, because they're in the pockets, or the Democrats are in the pockets of and I'm talking about black clergy, because if you listen to a lot of people in the pulpit today, they won't say anything about Planned
Nothing.
Parenthood. They won't say anything about what's
Nothing.
going on with transgenderism. They won't say anything about that. They'll talk about these illegals that are here illegally, and they'll complain about them. They'll complain about cuts to Medicaid. They'll complain about other things, but they will not talk about those issues that really affect, and I'm speaking to the black community, that affect the black community the most, especially when it comes to abortion, the leading cause of death. They won't speak to that
You're
because
right.
they know that's part of the platform of the Democratic Party, and their bread is buttered by the Democratic Party, so they can't speak on that. And that's the
Well, the name
disingenuous
of their
thing.
channel is the name of their channel is the Biblical Conservative. And what does God say about these things? That's the
Yeah.
first question you have to ask.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what I say, what you say. What's the Word of God say about it?
Exactly. Exactly.
And if
Yep.
that preacher is not exposing, the Bible tells us to have nothing to do with the unfruitful works of darkness, rather
Mm-hmm.
reprove them. Apostle Paul
Right.
wrote that. If we're supposed to expose, then why aren't we exposing it? Why are we collaborating with it or looking the other way? That's the sin of omission. To know
Mm-hmm.
what is right and not to do it. In many cases, that's worse than the sin. It's committing the sin.
It
That
is.
you could do something to stop it, yet you turn your back.
Yep.
So that almost makes you I know in some states that if there's a crime going on and you don't help, if someone was punching you in the face and I just didn't, I mean, okay, I'm not gonna go out, I'm not expected to go out and defend you, but I at least call 911, at least do
Yeah.
something to help you
Right.
alleviate that. I'm an accessory, and I
Right.
think we should address assisted suicide too. That's right, because that's a big issue. And
Mm-hmm.
by the way, Planned Parenthood is up to its eyeballs. They're the LGBTQ agenda. They're promoting assisted suicide.
Wow.
Suicide, that's an oxymoron, which means sharp, dull, contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
Suicide is when you kill yourself, self murder. So there's really no such thing as assisted suicide.
No.
You are an accomplice. You are either murdering me. So if I say, look, I want a prescription and I'm going to take this prescription and I'm going to poison myself and die. So I go to the doctor, and the doctor, instead of saying, "Well, look, Hal, things, yeah, okay, you got stage four cancer. There's ways to, but no, I want to die." And some people just want to die because they're depressed. My wife just left me. I'd lost my job. Whatever. So not only is the doctor an accessory to the crime, but the druggist, the clerk that fills that prescription. You go to a drugstore. Now, I'm not taking any medication, but over the years, I've had on occasions, and a lot of people can remember. You go to a drugstore, you get your prescription. Usually, the pharmacist or clerk, in some cases, tells you you need to take one pill 3 times a day before a meal, or do you have any questions? That clerk knows what's in that prescription. Can you imagine the clerk says, "Well, you need to take this, but make sure that you've told somebody about it so they don't find your rotting corpse 6 months later." Can you
Mm-hmm.
imagine that being so? That makes them an accessory to this as well.
Right.
So yeah, so it's this culture of death, and
Yeah.
I know Vince Ellison makes the case that the Democrat Party is the most evil organization in the history of mankind. He makes a good case for it. I don't disagree completely,
Yeah.
but I have to say that it's definitely become a culture of death, a death cult. When
Yeah.
abortion and the promotion of homosexuality, which is a sterile lifestyle,
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
sterility,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's what's being promoted and celebrated.
Yeah.
And
It
but
is.
I'm encouraged by some of the. I think people have had enough. I see the pushback with this homosexual agenda, the LGBTQ, a lot of corporate America. Hey, we're losing money, and people sometimes do the right thing for the wrong reason. You do the
Right.
right thing because it's glorifying God, or gee, I'm losing profits. But
Mm-hmm.
nevertheless, it's the right thing.
It's the right
Okay,
thing to
we'll
do.
stop.
Yeah.
We won't fund this parade because there's pushback. People aren't buying our product. When that when that light beer company, Bud Light, when they had that what's his name, the so-called transgender
Oh yeah, that guy.
endorsement.
Yeah. I don't know his name.
You know what?
Yeah.
He might
Yeah.
be the smartest guy because this might be a complete fraud. He's just making millions and millions of dollars off this thing. I mean, he calls himself a woman. He says, "Why you haven't had my period yet?" Come on, nobody's that stupid.
But how people are, because in a number of ways people number one, they don't think anymore. I mean, people are not
That's
knowledgeable when
true.
it comes to the Word of God,
That's
let
true.
alone when it comes to history and
A
it
little
comes
bit
to
of
civics.
science.
When it comes to
True.
so that people are dumbed down by social media, they're entertained to
That's
death,
true.
and so
Yeah.
people don't
That's
think. People don't have critical thinking skills. So you can have that kind of guy prancing around like he's a woman, and people will literally believe it, and they'll fight you
believe
about it,
you.
which is the
Oh
crazy
yeah.
thing
Oh
about
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah,
they'll call you a transphobe. Like they
yeah.
come up with a new phobe every other day. What's it? I remember I was on a cable TV show back in I think 17, and a Baptist minister was one of the persons. I didn't realize, and he was more adamant for the left. I'm thinking, what's wrong with this picture? He
Wow.
called himself a cis. He's a homosexual, and he called himself a cisgender. I said, what the heck is a cisgender? I've never heard of that. So all these
I
new
know.
terms, coming
All
up.
right,
I
right,
guess a
right.
cisgender is a homosexual that's attracted to members of their own gender. I guess so.
I don't know. Yeah, it's crazy, crazy. So, I have probably a couple more questions for you. So, my question for you is, what can the pro life movement, the ones that want to push the sanctity of life, what can they do given that Roe v. Wade has been rightly adjudicated, and now the decision is in the hands of the states, and we've seen a number of states like Ohio and other states actually enshrine abortion into their state constitutions. What can pro-life people do to educate people? Because it seems like to me the left and the ones that want to push abortion are more strategic and more effective in communicating than pro-life people.
You're right. At the end of my book, I make some recommendations that you could do. And people ask me all the time, what should I do about it? Well, first, ask God where He wants you in the fight. Does He want you to be in front of that abortion mill? Does He want you to write about it? Does He want you to speak out against it? So we encourage people to find a local pro-life organization, and they're all over the country. There's a group in New Hampshire called Cornerstone, Mass Citizens for Life in Massachusetts. They're just all over the place. And if you don't have a local chapter, start one. Again, if you ask God where you want me in the fight, and then bingo, that might be where God wants you to be to speak out again, to educate, and educate by sharing videos like this, by getting to know your state legislature, because that's what a lot of the action is. Get to know them, even if they're hardcore liberals. You never know. Maine, for example, they had a vote on it, and it passed by a handful of votes to support abortion in the state. It was almost like a mini revival broke out at the state house. There was thousands of pro-life activists, and they got down to like you can only have 1 minute to testify, and they were there till like 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. And the number of Democrats changed their vote and voted pro. Some of them vote pro-life, which was
Yeah.
surprising. And it only by a few votes did they pass this. So it can be discouraging, but that's you just. I mean, it took Roe v. Wade 72. It took all these years. So don't
Yeah.
give up.
All right.
Don't get discouraged. Be of good. And even if with the pill, the abortion pill, it's easier to. And the abortion pill has so many horrible side effects too.
Mm-hmm.
This notion that you take a pill and all the problems will go away doesn't work that way. How
Right.
many drug addicts in Boston? They have something called what do they call it? The methadone mile. All these people have thought I have a problem, but a little painkiller will solve it, and it only made
Mm-hmm.
it worse. And they're strung out and living on the streets, and a lot of these people, by the way, are people from very successful backgrounds.
Yeah.
They're not all from inner. In fact, most of them are not from the inner city.
Yeah.
And that was another government boondoggle. They decided under the Nixon administration, methadone, that would be a great way to get people off heroin, and it made matters worse.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, they didn't know that methadone came from Nazi Germany, but that's another interesting story. A lot of bad
Wow.
stuff came from Nazi Germany, but we can't blame the Nazis for eugenics. They learned it from
They
us.
learned from us. They did. You're right. They learned from us. But and wow, I'm gonna have to have you back on because there's so many connections that I'm seeing between Nazi Germany and the early thought here in America in the early 1900s. How I mean, Nazi, they were horrible. They were. But we had some co-conspirators over here as well that contributed to
Oh
some of
yeah.
that same thought
And
process. And
Sanger was one of them, yeah.
yeah,
And we had a lot of corporate America that had no problem funding them. In fact, there's a book called Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler by Anthony
mm,
Sutton. Recommend
okay,
that.
Okay.
Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. See, they fund both sides.
No,
Whoever
they do.
we want to control both sides.
They
So
do. They
if we
do.
whoever wins, we still have control, and then
They
that's
do.
how diabolical folks
Yeah.
are. Wall
Yeah.
Street and the rise of Hitler,
Right.
and
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. So my last question to you, Hal, is after you've done all this research on Margaret Sanger and Dr. Gamble, did your opinion of them change and become worse? Or was it something that reaffirmed what you knew about them before? What's your overall impression of them? Were
Oh
there's
well,
people that had,
yeah,
yeah,
it just reaffirmed what I knew. And again, it's like more evidence. If I was trying to prosecute them and I have this evidence, it may not be enough. But now I get plenty, and there's no way they're going to get away in the court of public opinion. This stuff. This is their own letters, and it wasn't. Hey, I changed my position. I was this, and we know that people are redeemed through the blood of Jesus Christ. That you. I mean, there are some things in my past that I'm not exactly proud of, but I know that God forgive me for that, and I've repented. And I think that goes for most people, and people that we know may have had that. That's why I respect the person who was a believer from day one, from the early childhood,
mm-hmm,
and they never departed. You don't have to be a drug addict or a criminal. You could come to Jesus at a young age and stay there.
and stay
I
there,
remember
right?
I heard a gentleman that was running for office. He said, I said, I accepted Christ when I was 8 years old. That solved a lot of problems. That prevented a lot of problems in my life.
Yeah, yeah,
So
that's
that
true.
doesn't mean you don't have issues, you don't have problems, but it means that they're a whole lot better than I don't have to be at rock bottom before or
Exactly,
looking at a
exactly.
20-year jail term before I come to
Before I came
say,
to the Lord, no, the Lord can
that's
keep you from eight
right.
years old all the way to the end of your life. Yeah, you don't have to be strung out on crack and stuck on
Right.
drugs in order to come to Christ, or have all kind of things happen to you before you come to Him. He can save you at an
That's
early
right.
age, and you can stay with Him. So
That's
that's
right.
good.
So yeah,
That's
so these two
yeah,
people, and again, I hope they made their peace with Christ in the last few seconds of their life. I
yeah,
don't know if that's the case because I
yeah. I
don't wish
doubt it.
hell on anybody.
All right.
But we don't need to celebrate people like this. We don't need to
Mm-hmm.
celebrate. By the way, I want to mention Gamble's organization was called Pathfinder. It's now
Okay.
called Pathfinder International, and they're the ones that do acknowledge his racist roots, although they
Okay.
haven't changed their mission any. And another thing too, Sanger, right after there's nothing about World War II in any of the letters I found. They sort of went silent.
Hmm.
But after World War II, she wants to get a meeting with the Emperor of Japan
Yeah.
because they want to have eugenic. They just lost a good chunk of their male population, and it wasn't enough.
Mm,
It wasn't enough. We need to lose more of it.
mm,
And
mm, mm,
also
mm.
in India, and in sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, most of the UN population programs are not in Western Europe. They're not in Russia or the Ukraine. They're in sub-Saharan Africa.
Yep.
And I have friends from Africa, and they'll say that they come with money and implement this program, but you have to do this. You have to have
Mm-hmm.
sterilization programs, birth control programs, and thank God some nations like Zambia, for example, and Uganda have said no, we don't want anything.
Yeah.
Nothing. In fact, when Trump defunded the USAID,
Mm-hmm.
not one sub-Saharan African nation complained about it
Right.
because money. They use the word money comes with strings attached. They're not strings; they're chains.
They are changed. Yeah, they are.
Take
They
the
are.
money, but you got to do this.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
You
why you wonder why like Bill Gates and people like that, they always end up in Africa. All the billionaires always end up
Oh yeah,
doing their trials and
always
experiments in
under
Africa.
yeah.
Hmm.
One of our instructors at our camp is Alex Newman, and I think he's known by many people in the Mordecai Mission. When he refers to Gates, he calls him Bill Gates of Hell, because that's exactly what he's advocating, the gates of hell.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But we know the scripture says the gates of hell should not
That
prevail.
prevail against the
So
church.
some
Hmm.
people get too discouraged, and they get discouraged. And one of the things I do encourage, and I mentioned this in one of the Mordecai Mission conference calls, they said, not just run for office. Oh, gee, I want to run for governor or mayor or president. Run for the town selectman. Run for
Hmm.
planning board and library commission if you have it. There's a lot of vacancies. I became a member of the planning, not planning, but the budget committee because it was a vacancy. And I was asked to and I got elected unopposed.
Yep.
And so there's a lot of you can make a difference. But so
Hmm.
don't just worry about being mayor and get to know what's happening in your own town. But we can
Right.
look at D.C. or the capital of your state, but stuff happens in your own town as well, or your county if you still have a
Mm-hmm.
county.
It does.
There's county hospitals that are doing abortions. What impact can you have to help prevent that? But if you
Mm.
don't even know your own county commissioner or know your sheriff or know
Yeah.
your selectman or the town planning board member, um, that's where they actually it's local. Not
Yep.
that I was a friend of the late Dapper Tip O'Neill, Congressman, Speaker of the House, but he said all politics is local.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody who was in Congress started out, most of them started out as selectmen or state reps, and they got to the big leagues. And
Yep.
we need to do that too. And we don't
Yeah.
vie for office. God, where do you want me?
Exactly. That's
It's
it.
like
Play
the
by the
story of
spirit.
Amazing Grace. You're familiar with the
Mm-hmm.
story of Amazing Grace. William Wilberforce, he had an incredible voice, singing voice. Well, he wanted to sing for the Lord. No, he was told, "You stay you stay as a member of Parliament. That's where God wants you. That's where you can do more. You can impact the gospel by
Yeah.
staying." And what he did, it took him 20 years,
Right.
and he eventually was able to make a slavery illegal. Now,
Mm-hmm.
slavery was accepted all over the world. It
Yeah, it
was
was.
something that was the condition of life, and I have to say, England was the nation that did its. England and the United States were the two countries that did its most to abolish slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And in these Muslim countries, uh, I also recommend Thomas Sowell's book, Black Rednecks and White
Oh yeah,
Liberals.
that's a
He
great
goes,
book.
he,
Great book.
oh man, he goes into it. He said that he said slavery, that slavery was not initially based on race. It only was used towards the end of slavery to justify it. It was just,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I conquer the nation. The word Slav is Slavic, means Russians are Slav. They were enslaved by other whites. And he
Mm-hmm.
said it was the sailing ship that made it profitable to take people from Africa and send
Yeah.
them
That's when
across
they
the
became
ocean.
chattel.
But and
Yeah. Yep.
prior
Mm-hmm.
to that, it was not feasible. You couldn't make any money on it, so you
Mm-mm.
didn't do that.
No, because prior to that,
So
even in biblical ancient days, you became a slave to pay off a debt, or if you lost
that's
a
right.
battle, it wasn't your chattel property. It was because of those things. Chattel was the chattel slavery here in America and other parts of Europe was the difference. Between the slavery in the ancient world. But yeah, thank God that
And
He
the other
used
difference is
people.
that there was no
Yeah.
year of jubilee where
Right.
you were
Right.
offered
Exactly.
freedom.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
so if
Yeah.
slavery started in the United States 1776, that's when the United States became a country. If it was biblically based, then you should have had year of jubilee in 1826, and it
26.
unfortunately
Yep.
didn't happen.
Then. Yep. It
Yeah.
didn't happen. So that's how you know it wasn't
So,
wasn't biblically
but
based.
it's
Yeah.
easy
Mm-hmm.
for us. There's a term called presentists. It's how we look at the past by today's standards, and we
Mm-hmm.
can't do that because if you were raised in a culture that where certain things were accepted, and you were supposed to speak out against it, it was the whole
Yeah.
culture, and it takes time. But we have nothing to complain about. We have nothing to look back and say, "Oh, they did this. How horrible!" Look at us with our
Yeah.
mutilating little boys,
Right.
little
Boys.
children,
Exactly.
even after they're born.
Mm-hmm.
So we have, I don't say you and I, no,
Yeah.
but I mean our generation.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
don't have, and we bombed civilian populations
We do.
for the purpose of killing civilians. That
Yes.
was 200 years ago. That would be unheard of. That you don't go out of your way to deliberately kill civilians,
Mm-hmm.
but we did it. And
Yep.
today, most people will defend that, and that's
Yep.
not
They will.
not biblical. You know,
No, it's not.
women in combat arms.
Right.
Look at the Old Testament. The Old
Yeah.
Testament, when Gideon, he said, no, you go down to the lake and or the river and you drink the water a certain way. Okay, you can
Mm-hmm.
go and you do this.
Yep.
You're not,
Mm-hmm.
and God made a few exceptions, but and that's I'm not going to argue with God's exceptions, but
Yeah.
we put women who don't need to be in combat arms units in harm's way.
Right.
And to me,
Right.
that's repugnant. Christian
Yeah.
America, and we don't speak out against it. And I also want to make a plug for homeschooling too.
Okay.
Homeschooling, our government schools are helping to promote these views. They are doing a
Mm-hmm. They
terrible
are.
job on the children, and we have an obligation. King Solomon said, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom."
Yep.
And while I'm no fan of Malcolm X, the old saying, "A stop clock is right twice a day."
Mm-hmm.
He had, and I'm going to put this on a T-shirt. He said, "Only a fool will allow his enemies to teach his children."
That's true.
Why are so many Christians allowing our enemies to teach
To
our
teach
children.
our children,
And we wonder
indoctrinate our
why.
children.
You wonder why Joey comes home and says, "Mommy, you're a fascist. Daddy, you're a fascist." And by the way, I'm no longer Joey. I'm Josephine. Where are you getting this
Yes.
stuff? So the
Yes.
parents are the ones that put them in that environment.
Mm-hmm.
See,
Yep.
and
They have. They
I know
have.
most parents, they before they might look at a doctor, a pediatrician, and say, "Okay, this pediatrician has a good record. This one, I'm not sending my child to that pediatrician, but this one." Or maybe we don't want to have our children eat a lot of junk food. We're going to have good diet. We're going to have fresh vegetables and fresh fruit. But then we put them in a government school, and
Mm-hmm.
we destroy their
Yeah.
mind.
Destroy their
My
mind.
late
Yep.
friend my late friend Sam Blumenfeld, who was a pioneer in the homeschool movement, said he called it menticide, the
Hmm.
destruction of a mind. And he wrote an essay called "Eugenics and the Creation of a Black Underclass." And we have that essay on our website as well. And he looked at it all deliberate, all deliberately done to us.
Yep. Yep. Definitely deliberately done. So, wow, this has been a great conversation. Hal, definitely got to get you back on. So,
Love to, yeah.
how can people get a copy of the book, and how can people learn more about the organization and be able to contribute and assist where needed?
Well, our website is campconstitution.net. We also have a Facebook page and a YouTube channel and a Rumble channel. We don't have as many subscribers as you, but we're hoping to get there. It just takes more people to press that subscribe button and share the videos, and that's what we recommend with your. And I did subscribe to your channel, by the way. I think I did it a while ago. So that's how we get the word out. Or to get the book, we have a free download. Just go to campconstitution.net and you'll see a little bar that says, it's all downloads, online bookstore. Click the downloads and scroll down. We have a lot of stuff on there. Scroll down and you'll be able to download it. And also, if you want to buy it, I think we sell them for $15 a copy. You can go to the online bookstore and buy a copy. The price includes shipping.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to reach out to me, anyone listening to this, just you can get my email address from the website or my phone number, and I'd be happy to help you organize or recommend. And I'd recommend the Mordecai mission too, if
Yes.
you're because you folks, I was very impressed. You go to your conference, you have people from all over the country, and some really interesting people that are working as to. And what I like about it is it's people from all different backgrounds, because
Right.
that's the true church. It's not just
Mm-hmm.
one group of people with a certain pigmentation. It's all. We all have
Right.
the same agenda, is to stop all this evil and advance the kingdom of God.
Amen. Amen. Well, thank you so much, Hal. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Well,
And like
thank
I
you for
said,
having me. God bless you.
yeah, God bless you. And we definitely gotta have you back on, because you're a wealth of
Looking forward.
information, and this is needed in today's time, in the lack of information. Even though we got exposure to more information, we're lacking knowledge and lacking dissemination of it. So I definitely appreciate you hopping on board and
My
talking about
people
your
go
book.
into captivity. My
Yep.
people go into captivity for a lack of knowledge. That's right.
Mm-hmm. They are, and they reject it. And see, that's the thing. People reject the knowledge. They reject it. It's there for them to get, but they reject it. And
They
so,
reject.
my point to everybody that's listening to this interview, to this conversation, don't reject the knowledge that was given. Share it, embrace it, and pass it on, because it can change a generation of people and turn their hearts back to righteousness and back to the Lord. God bless you.